Today is November 8th, 2024, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. In this talk, I'd like to speak to Christian men, and I'd like to speak to Christian men only. This message is intended for Christian men, and I could be even more specific and say Catholic men, who are married or thinking about getting married, and only for such men. It's not intended to be listened to by women. And as I get into this discussion, if you are a woman who hears me say that, who hears me say that this discussion is not intended for women, and you continue to listen to it anyway, you'll see what part of the problem is that I'm going to discuss as I get into this topic. But this talk is intended for men, married men or men intending to be married. There are lots of serious problems in Catholic culture, in family culture. There's obviously a vocations crisis where no one is interested in religious vocations, and that doesn't just mean in becoming priests. There's no interest in religious life. There's no interest in contemplative life. And one of the reasons for that is that Catholic men choose to marry instead. I am part of even though I was married before I became a Catholic, I could say I could have been a religious but chose to be married. And so we look at all of the Catholic married men and we say, this is the vocations crisis, that all the Catholic men choose to get married. And the problem that arises is that many Catholic men, after choosing to get married, then decide that they want to be religious. They want to devote their life to religious activity. They want to be great men of prayer and devotion. They want to be men who study and spend their time in theological questions or philosophical discussions. They want to enjoy all of the benefits of religious life, but they also want to enjoy all the benefits of married life, or I should say, to be more accurate, they want to enjoy all of the benefits of conjugal life. And so we've got this dilemma where we don't have men really interested in religion, and we don't have men really interested in married life, which means taking upon themselves the work of the laity. We have this sort of mixed, half-baked male culture of men who want to do things that religious men do sometimes, part-time, and who want to do things that married men do part-time. And when you've got a part-time religious and a part-time married man, you end up with neither a religious nor a married man. And this is how I would describe the problem in modern Catholic men's culture. There are many men right now, many Catholic men who love to talk about religion, who are between the ages of 18 and 25. They love to go to adoration, maybe on their college campus. They love to go to retreats. They love to go to all different kinds of Catholic activities and talk about being so zealous for Christ. And yet, as single men, they have no intention of pursuing a religious vocation. They have an interest in getting married. And so you've got this conflict of interests. Because when we get married, if we think about the duties of a husband and a father, those duties are really running in the opposite direction of the duties of a religious man. A religious man is undistracted in his devotion to Christ. And it's sort of the goal of married men. It's the goal of Christian men to try and argue that that they desire to serve Christ without distraction, to be wholly devoted to Christ, to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then they sign themselves up for secular life. And it doesn't make much sense. Either their confession about their interest in Christ is dishonest and exaggerated, or they make bad decisions. But the two things can't be true at the same time. St. Paul explains this in his letter to the Corinthians. He explains why he, for example, did not marry, because he wants to be devoted without distraction to the Christian ministry, to the religious life. He doesn't want any distraction in his life. And so he chooses to live in a state where there is no distraction. And he advises others to do the same, unless they're not able to do so. And if they're not able to accept the single focus of that religious life, because they're too distracted by physical desires, sexual desires, and so on, desires for relationships and company and community and all this kind of stuff, then they probably need to choose married life. And again, this is explained by St. Paul. This is not my opinion. And I know it's not popular, but it's right in sacred scripture. So we've got this conflict of interest in men, and men choose to become married men, and then they struggle as married men because many of them really aren't interested in the life of the laity. They're not interested in entering into the market. They really don't have anything that they're excited about pursuing in secular circles. They really are men who would have been happy being religious, but they chose to marry largely because they've been told in modern society that marriage and religious life are equal as far as states of life go. So you can pick either one. They're equal, even though this was condemned at the Council of Trent. And so they accept this idea and they say, well, hey, if they're equal, I have one option, which is to go and live as a voluntary slave of Christ in the ministry, or as a monk subject to an abbot in a monastery, or I can go and, again, marry Melissa, and we can just go and do whatever we want as a secular married couple, and they're equal. Well, I'll take Melissa. And that's how I think many young Catholic men think. It's partly because they're taught falsely about the states of life and the merit of them. But it's also because they make decisions that I believe they have reasons to know are false. But I'd like to talk to the men who choose to get married, because we've already crossed that bridge and there's no going back. Jesus specifically addressed this during his earthly ministry. He specifically spoke to his audiences about the need to choose one or the other. And he also told men that if they do choose to marry, there's no turning back on that decision, because divorce is forbidden. And that teaching on marriage led St. Peter to confess in the Gospels, if this be true, then it's better for a man not to marry. That's the logical conclusion of Jesus' teaching to young men. And so if men do choose to marry, they choose to do so for life. They do not have the option to change their mind or divorce. And they've got to take upon themselves the duties of a layman and not pretend that they've chosen religion, even if they married a Catholic woman and they like to play religion together. They're lay people. They have responsibilities to serve the mission of the laity, which is to go into the world, into the secular world, and, to quote the Catechism, direct temporal affairs according to the will of God. That's the mission of the laity, to direct temporal affairs according to the will of God. So the man is not free to just go and get any job he wants, any job that gives him a paycheck, and say, hey, I've got to do what I got to do to make a living. No, the duty of the laity is to direct temporal affairs according to the will of God. That's the mission of the laity. So if you want to talk about religion as a married man, what religion for a married man does is directs temporal affairs according to the will of God. So you can't use the need to make a living as an excuse to not direct temporal affairs. It's your mission as a layman to direct temporal affairs according to God's will. You are responsible to change what can be changed, not to just accept things and take your place or occupy your cubicle and say, like, I don't see the evil, I don't hear the evil, so I'm not responsible for the evil. You're responsible to direct temporal affairs according to God's will. And then when you enter into married life, you're responsible to take upon yourself the role of the head of the household, to take a role that parallels the role that Christ took with reference to the church. You're not equal with your wife, regardless of what is said in popular modern society. The two of you are not equally responsible to pay the bills. The two of you are not equally responsible to bear the burdens of household life. It's your burden. You're the head of the household, just as Christ is the head of the church. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about this life of a married man, talk about what the problems are in modern married culture, talk about how men can solve these problems, because these problems are absolutely in men's control. If they weren't, then the Christian teaching on marriage would be false. But in order to really understand what this authority consists of and how it actually works requires some pretty radical discussion. And that's why I said this discussion is for married men who actually hold this role in the family. It's not for their wives, not for their children. It's not for unmarried men. It's none of their business. It's for married men. And I'm willing to take the risk of talking about these things frankly. But I've made it clear several times that this talk is intended for a specific audience. And as I said, if a woman chooses at this point to keep listening, you can see what part of the problem is. There's just no respect. So when a man chooses to get married, as I said, he doesn't choose to enter into a romantic life with his wife and embark on a fantasy of romantic adventures that are going to last the rest of his life. It's true, he takes for himself a wife, and it's true that there is normally romantic interest between the husband and the wife, very intimate relationship. They usually love each other in not just a Christian sense, but more of an erotic and natural sense, romantic sense, and that's all good. But the fruit of that romantic love that they have for one another is the birth of children, unless, of course, they're going to abort them or try to contracept them, and that would be immoral. But again, common in modern society. But naturally, that romantic love between a man and his wife will lead to the bearing of children. And once those children enter into the world, that man, I'm not going to talk about women at all in this talk, that man immediately takes upon himself, voluntarily, no one, he doesn't, the stork doesn't just drop kids off to people whom God chooses. He voluntarily caused himself to become a father. The responsibility for the provision for that child's needs becomes his moral obligation, his religious duty. And so, again, religion for a married man means providing for a wife and children. And this is why it's so difficult when men who are really interested in religion choose to get married, because they really don't have the disposition towards secular affairs to take upon themselves this work of providing for a family. I really wish that more young men were talked to frankly about married life and told that what married life means is that you are taking upon yourself these responsibilities for life, not for 6 months, not for a week, for life. Think about it. When a religious or when a young man decides to join a religious community, he's given the opportunity to come and see, to come and visit the monastery, spend a few days with the monks, see what their life is like, follow them around through their day. Then if he decides to join, he may be able to enter into a novitiate period where it may be a year, where he goes through formation. He actually lives with the monks and actually participates more fully in the life of the community. He gets to experience, gets to test it out, gets to see whether he can actually handle it. And then there may be a time for a temporary commitment where he makes promises for 3 years to live in the monastery according to the rule of the monastery, subject to the leadership in the monastery. He may do that for 3 years with full privileges as a member of the monastic community. And then he has another opportunity to make final vows where he vows for life. So there's this set of temporary stages or temporary promises where a man slowly and carefully moves into that final profession of vows to devote his life to religion and to that specific religious community. Marriage doesn't work like that. When a man decides to enter into marriage, he makes his final vows on the day of his wedding ceremony. He vows till death do us part. And we can see that that's a pretty radical thing to do. To be 23 years old, as I was, and to stand before a church full of people and say, at age 23, I vow to be the husband of this woman until death. That's a pretty radical thing to do, and yet it's done quite casually by Christian men, and it's often done without any real consideration of the costs of what that vow is going to mean and what it signifies. So I wish that there was some more honest preparation before marriage to talk to young men about these things and say, your relationship with this woman, and I'll just keep using the name Melissa, your relationship is going to bear children, and you're going to be responsible to provide for the needs of those children as your religious duty. Are you sure that you're interested in that work? Are you sure that you desire to bear that burden for many, many years? You know, I'm now 49 years old. My oldest child is 24 years old. My youngest child is 9 years old. So I've got at least 9 more years before all of my children are legally adults. So you're talking 33, 34 years of full-time parenting for dependent children. 34 years. That's what marriage is about. And it doesn't stop when they're 18. The children, as they transition to independent adult life, they still need tons of help. Maybe the most expensive help of their lives. They need thousands of dollars to get established, thousands and thousands to get established as independent adults. And you can choose not to give that to them and put them in bad circumstances where they're stressed and put under pressure to make possibly bad decisions, or you can help them and actually guide them through that difficult transition time and help them get established well. But parenting is what you're going to be doing and providing for those children for the rest of your life. For the rest of your life. There's no time at which you can say, I'm no longer responsible to help my children. You brought them into the world voluntarily. And young men need to think about that because it's very difficult work when it's not rightly understood. I don't want to say it's very difficult work because for men who are actually wired for secular life, I don't think it is very difficult work. When men have a right understanding of family life and the life of a layman, they have a right understanding about how Christians are to live in secular circles, what their duties are. I don't think it's a difficult life for someone who's actually prepared for that life. But I think that many men enter into that life unprepared, and for them it's going to be very difficult. And I'd like to talk about that life because I'd like to try and help men to deal with it. So when a man chooses to get married, and I want to emphasize chooses because there's no obligation to marry. When a man chooses to marry, he receives many benefits, that's for sure, but he receives far more burdens, I would say, and I don't use burden in a negative sense. I just mean it as works. He takes upon himself many great labors, many great challenges that he's going to have to bear, and he bears full responsibility for them. That's why when man is referred to as the head of the household, the buck stops with him. He is the one responsible for the outcomes. He's responsible for the household. His wife is not responsible for the household. He's responsible for the household. And that household includes his wife and his children. His wife will likely be a dependent. She'll likely be home. She'll be bearing children, caring for those children. That's her full-time duty as a mother. She is under no obligation to go out and make a living, to split the bills. We don't go Dutch in marriage. When it comes to paying for things, that's the man's responsibility. That doesn't mean the woman doesn't help at times, but there are times when the woman can't help, and she is under no obligation to help. So the man takes upon himself the responsibility to provide for both his wife and their children. When men don't do that, when men don't take upon themselves that responsibility, that's where the culture of death comes from. All of this talk about the culture of death and abortion and contraception, we demonize women for choosing to get abortions and choosing to use contraception and choosing all of these things, and act as if men are not the cause of this problem. I think if every woman had a choice at age 17, 18 to press a button, and if they pressed that button, they would receive a generous, good husband who would provide for them generously for the rest of their lives and allow them to be mothers, I don't think that this problem would exist. And I know that there may be some isolated crazy women who actually love self-destruction. They wouldn't choose to press the button. But I think many, many more women would press that button than would not press that button. And most women today are in a situation where they want to be married and they want to have relationships with men. They want to have these things, but there just are no men available to do these things. Men don't want to do these things. Men don't want to take responsibility. Men don't want to provide. Men want to play. They want to act like they're actually children, and the wife is their mommy, who's going to make them yummy food and scratch their back. They don't see marriage as being their responsibility to provide for their wives and children. and to provide generously according to the golden rule, since I don't think any man would want his father to not provide generously. I don't think any man would say, what I would like is for my father to give me barely what I need to survive, just what I need, just like the cheapest clothing, the cheapest shoes we can find, the bare minimum food. Like I think I could survive on some bread, maybe a little bit of milk, maybe some rice and beans thrown in there for some protein and fiber. I think beyond that, nothing else would be necessary. And what I would really like is to have a father who just provides me with the bare essentials. No one would say that. And so living like that as a father is to violate the golden rule. Even Jesus says, you being evil, give good gifts to your children. The desire to be stingy and cheap with our families is not Christian behavior. But again, it's common today, and this is why there's no Christian culture. But anyway, a man takes upon himself this responsibility to provide for a family and to do so generously as he himself would like to be provided for. If he was a wife, this is how he would like to be provided for. If he was a child, this is how he would like to be provided for. He's to take upon himself this role generously, not thinking he's doing everybody a favor by dropping off a loaf of bread at the house, but as a responsibility that he's voluntarily undertaken, which gives him the opportunity to show his wife and children what the love of God looks and feels like. He's to be an imitator of God. As we call God our Father and think about how God serves as our Father, when we take upon ourselves to be human or earthly fathers, we do so in imitation of our Heavenly Father. And just think about the message that our behavior preaches to our kids. If that's what God is like, not many kids are going to be interested in God. So we take upon ourselves this work of providing generously for our wives and our children. And now in return for that, we gain some benefits. We gain the benefit of being the authority. We gain the benefit of being the head of the household. Our wives are told to be subject to us. They're not told to be subject to men who don't work. They're not told to be subject to men who don't provide for the family, because those men aren't husbands. They're told to be subject to their husbands, assuming that their husbands are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. I don't think any man could make much of a case that his wife needs to be submissive to him while he doesn't fulfill his obligation to his wife and children. Be a pretty ridiculous argument. But a man gains a number of benefits when he takes upon himself the responsibility for providing for his household. And these benefits, I would say, are built into the nature of a man. If we go back and look at the Greek philosopher Xenophon, who wrote in the 4th century BC, he wrote about the order of a household according to natural philosophy. So this is not a religious idea. This is a natural and physical reality. He explained that the man and the woman, their bodies, their nature is different. Their roles can be seen in their actual constitution. The woman's body is very weak. And when I use the word weak, I don't mean that she can't do pull-ups or that she can't run a 2-mile under a certain time. I'm not talking like military nonsense. The woman's body is weak in her ability to do real-life work because the expected natural activity of the woman's body, which is to be engaged in childbearing and nursing and so on, can't work. And so relative to the husband, she is weak. Weak in the sense that she cannot be depended on to do great work. So when we look at the woman's body, we can see that she's not designed to be earning a living in the world. She's not designed to be harvesting crops. She's not designed to be fighting in wars. She's not designed to be organizing and running businesses. She's not designed for global travel. Her body has many weaknesses that need to be taken care of. She needs to be provided with a place where she can enjoy peace and quiet and be able to rest. She needs a place where during pregnancy she's safe. She has all of her needs provided for. She's not going to be able to get around much, especially if she has difficulty during pregnancy. She's going to need to be provided for. She's going to need to be in a safe place where she can just take care of her physical health, and where maintenance is really a challenge, just to take care of herself. We look at her body, we see that she's the one who's designed to bear the children, which requires 9 months of pregnancy, and then she's going to deliver the children, which requires time for recovery. And then she's designed by nature to also be the source of the child's food. So we're talking multiple years for each child, where a woman's body is really going to be available for nothing other than the care of that child. And in this sense, the woman, with respect to work, is called weak. Meanwhile, the man has no such limitations. The man is unencumbered physically, even if his wife does become pregnant. As she goes through pregnancy, his body's not affected. When the child is delivered, his body's not affected. When the child is growing and needs to be nursed, his body's not affected. His body is capable of working. He is able-bodied and available to work without interruption. And that's what is meant by referring to man as the strong. Again, it's not some silly idea that he can bench press more than her or run faster than her. We see many men today who that's not true of. But what it means to be strong is to be able to work. What it means to be weak is to be prevented from being able to work. We also see a woman going through menstruation, all of the distraction and discomfort of that. Man has none of that. His body is unencumbered. He's free to work, unhindered, free to work, strong. And so we see if the family wants to have a stable living, and if provision is going to be made for the family, it's very foolish to look to the woman to be the source of that provision. That's the man's responsibility. And he really has no excuse, because he's not doing any of the things that the woman is doing. He's not dealing with any of the problems or difficulties that the woman is dealing with. He's not dealing with any of the discomforts or distractions that the woman is dealing with. He is free to work and has no excuse. And he's accountable to that. To whom much is given, much is expected. He is accountable to give an account. Well, he needs to give an account for his stewardship of this strong, unhindered body that's capable of working. He needs to give an account for how that strength is used. And the purpose of that strength is not to allow him to hang out at the gym every night and work on his deadlifts. It's not for him to go out and play softball with the guys. It's not for him to pursue life as a bodybuilder. That strength is given to him to provide for a family. That strength is his for the sake of his wife and children, who don't have that strength. And not only does that strength make him accountable to the needs of his wife and children, but also to other members of society who don't have that strength, the handicapped and so on. And so he's called to works of mercy. So to whom much is given, much is expected. And man, in getting married, takes upon himself the burden of providing for a wife, who's going to go through all kinds of trouble for the sake of their marriage. And once children are born, to take upon himself the responsibility for work of the children who are unable to work and provide for themselves, obviously. And that work that he takes upon himself is going to last for decades. Decades. Not a few months. It doesn't matter that he's got this nice story to tell about that one time he worked really hard. Many men spend most of their adult life talking about this one time when they worked. No, that's normal. That's normal. That's supposed to be the everyday story. And we have the strength for that. Most physical problems men have are self-inflicted. They eat like pigs. They don't take care of themselves. They smoke and drink. They cause all kinds of health problems. They don't get reasonable, healthy exercise, and so on. And then they end up with health problems, and they act as if they're women who have these natural conditions that they can't do anything about. No, those are consequences of bad behavior in most cases. And again, we're not talking with people with real diseases that they're born with or things that develop that are out of their control. We're talking about most common problems that men face physically. They're self-inflicted. They're the consequences of bad habits. But men have this strength to work, and they're able to work. They're able to work day in, day out, week after week, month after month, year after year, with very little interruption. And that's good for the whole family. And men need to use that strength for that work because, again, the goal is not to just ask, well, what do we need to pay the bills? How much is the rent? How much do you need for groceries? How much is electricity if we don't use heating and air conditioning? What if we just keep the house always uncomfortable and make the electric bill as low? You see that's not the spirit of generous provision. So the father is not to ask, what does it cost to survive? To figure out, what the federal poverty level is and say, well, that seems reasonable. If the federal poverty level for a family of 5 is $4,000 a month or whatever it is, well, then $4,000 a month covers the needs of a family, and that's what I'm going to aim for. That's not that's not the work of a father. That's not how a father thinks. Rather, a father asks, what can I do? What opportunities do I have? What problems can I solve? What needs can I serve? What can I do profitably? And he works so that he can make as much honest profit as is possible within God's providence, working as hard as he can, working intelligently, strategically, collaborating with other men, doing the best that he can, working not for his own sake, not asking how much he wants to work, but working for the sake of fulfilling this obligation that he has to provide generously for his wife and children. And he's free to do that because of his physical condition, his nature as a man. Now again, this brings men some benefits. Men, in being the workers who go out into the world and earn the money, they are the lawful owners of that money. And when I say that, I know that might sound controversial because for many people who live as employees, they think about money in terms of take-home pay, and they don't think about money as business owners do, where there's a difference between one's business revenue and one's take-home pay, as it were. And for men where they don't have this division between business revenue and take-home pay, there's some confusion about how they should live because anything that a man desires is paid for out of that take-home pay, which is the pay that the children and his wife also need to live on. And so you can see a man who eats more than he needs to takes from his wife and children. A man who wants to invest in toys for himself to play with, he takes that money out of the account that provides for his wife and children. And you see that's not very Christ-like. St. Paul teaches us that Christ, though he was rich, made himself poor that we, through his poverty, might be made rich. Let that sink in. If you want to talk about what it means for a man to be the head of his household in the same way that Christ is the head of the church, this is what it means. Christ, though he was rich, made himself poor for our sake, that we, through his poverty, might be made rich. Christ's goal as the head of the church was to make his bride, make his family rich. And the way that he did that was through love. The way that he did that was by making himself poor. And this is the idea of voluntary poverty. Notice, the only man who can be voluntarily poor is a man who's rich. Though he was rich, yet for our sakes he became poor. That doesn't mean that he quit his job and became a homeless person. It means he actually sacrificed everything that he had and gave it to us. He made us rich through his voluntary poverty, through his sacrifice. And we see that his sacrifice was total. He didn't sacrifice Saturdays. He didn't sacrifice chocolate. His sacrifice was total sacrifice. The sacrifice of love. He says, no greater love has any man than to lay down his life for his friends. That's not some heroic story about a man who goes and dies for his fellow soldiers. That's a love that can be practiced in everyday family life, to lay down one's life for his wife and children. And again, it doesn't mean that a man goes and he has to get killed for his wife and children. It means that he voluntarily sacrifices his life. It's something in his control. He is free to choose to do it. He's free to love his wife and children, to lay down his life for his friends. And so when we have this idea of take-home pay, and the man goes and punches in at 9 and punches out at 5, doesn't work on weekends, and he gets this paycheck and calls it his take-home pay, that's the family money. That's not the man's money. And when the man spends the majority of his time, think about it, if he works from 9 to 5, that's a third of the hours of the day, and he only does that 5 days of the week. So he works 1/3 of the day, 5 days of the week, takes 2 days off. He's not working much more than he's working. And this is common in modern society. So many men who work as employees, they have this 9 to 5, 5-day-a-week job. They also add to that weeks of vacation and sick days and all this kind of stuff. And you end up with a man who's almost acting like he's doing someone a favor when he goes to work, as if there's something else for him to do, where there's really not something else for him to do. And this conflict in the work life, they talk about work-life balance. You've got to find work-life balance. The cause of that problem is that a man identifies by his life outside of work and considers work as something that's done only for mercenary reasons, and the man tends to do things he doesn't like, things that aren't honorable, that aren't significant, that aren't satisfying. And he goes in and does that work from 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and then he has this separate life outside that he considers to be his Christian life. And that divided life, that's not a Christian life. That's not the life of the Christian laity. And yet we've accepted this idea that you just put on your suit and tie and go sit in your cubicle, punch in, punch out, and then you go live your real life. No, that is your real life. But that's a very low view of work. And that's one of the fundamental problems with with modern family life is that men have a distorted view of what life should look like. They have this idea that what they do for work is not who they really are, and that the real them is the 5 to 9 character. And so they get this paycheck that they earn with grumbling, miserable that they have to go to this worldly job, and they talk about how they wish that they could just go and live in the country, maybe just get out of the city and go live on a farm. They talk all this fantasy nonsense because they're watching Little House on the Prairie, which is the worst show ever. I always, it's a sort of a joke in my family. I tell my wife, I think that Charles Ingle is probably the worst man that I've ever seen. And that's subject for another talk. It's pretty comical. When you actually step back and stop assuming that Charles Ingle is the good guy, but look at the effect of that guy's life as he constantly strives to be home smoking his pipe and playing his fiddle, rather than taking upon himself the normal responsibilities that all the other men are serving in the show. You've just got this maverick crazy guy trying to live whatever this life is that he's trying to live. And by the time he's done, as you go on, and my kids keep watching the series deep into the later episode, it just gets darker and darker and more miserable. It's more like watching a cult self-destruct. And yet for many men, they have this idea of living like Pa, living like Charles Ingalls out on the prairie. And I'd just like to ask you, how did that story, as fictional as it is, how did it end? It didn't end very well. So I don't understand that. But I think many men have that idea that they're in the workplace because it's just necessary, and they would love to break free from the workplace and just go live out in the fresh air and the plains, making peace with Indians and so on. Just not realistic, not mature, not responsible. Talking about a TV character that doesn't even exist. And when we get back to the role of the laity, and we say that a man's responsibility is to direct temporal affairs according to God's will, that's what a man should be asking himself. How can I do that? What temporal affair can I take up as that which I'm going to fix? I'm going to direct it according to God's will. I'm going to set it right. What temporal affair or group of temporal affairs am I going to claim as my mission field to direct according to God's will? Now, for me, it's obvious that I chose education. But in my work, I talked about this yesterday. I did a talk on rhetoric and business. And in that talk, I explained that much of my work is not really dealing with classical studies or Catholic studies per se, but it's a lot of behind the scenes work. It's got to do with technology and sales and marketing and computer programming, accounting, all sorts of practical issues. And when I approach my life's work and say my mission is to research, restore, publish, and teach the classical liberal arts, to redirect education according to the will of God, when I do that and I begin to set into that work, I realize that there's all kinds of problems. There's all kinds of other problems. That in order to do that work, we've got questions about technology that need to be sorted out. We've got questions about how a business is structured, how a school is organized, how a school is provided for financially. We've got legal issues to work through, all kinds of stuff. Sorry, my phone's ringing here. We've got all kinds of stuff that has to be ordered in order for that mission to be fulfilled. So I have to work in all different areas and ask these questions, and many times there's no solution waiting for a Christian man. And I've got to either customize an existing solution or create something from scratch or find some rigged up way to get something done. It's a very challenging life for a Christian man, and I find that life to be really satisfying. It's exhausting. It challenges me in every aspect of my being. I need to be intelligent. I need to be hardworking. I need to be sacrificial. I need to be shrewd. I need to be creative. Puts all of my skills to work, challenges me in every way. And I find that work to be very satisfying, very difficult, very challenging. But when I was 18 years old, I was playing sports, and I considered all of that difficulty and challenge and competition and contest and strategizing and all. I considered that to be fun. We consider that to be fun when it's time to talk about sports, but when it's time to talk about doing our actual work as laymen, we act like we're being persecuted. And again, this is what I think is the real cancer in Christian culture, is this aversion to the work of the laity, this aversion to the responsibility for married life. We take upon ourselves this responsibility, and I think in most cases, the temporal affairs that need to be directed would necessarily require that a Christian man be in a position of authority in business and whatever kind of work he does. I don't know how a Christian man can say, I'm going out into the world to direct temporal affairs by taking this entry-level cubicle job where I just do what 6 other people do without asking any questions. Just keep my eyes down and keep punching the keyboard. I don't know how that's a fulfillment of the work of the laity. Now, it could be a part of a mission where I say, my mission is to reform this industry or to reform this work. And to do that, I've got to start here at level 1 and work up to level 2 and level 3 and get into management. And then I have the power to begin changing things. You can see how that could be a fulfillment. But often I think that we're going to find that, especially with major corporations, we're going to find that they're set in their ways and they're not going to change, and that private business is the means by which temporal affairs get directed according to God's will. So men are going to be challenged to become business owners. They're going to be challenged to actually come up with better solutions to problems, solutions that don't require disobedience to God's will or violation of God's commandments. They're going to have to not only find solutions to things, but honorable, righteous, true, virtuous, obedient solutions to things. That's the real challenge of Christian business. When we look at the corporate world, we see the corporate world sees having women in the workplace as a solution. And we also see women on contraception getting abortions so that they can go and fulfill those roles. And we can see that solution has moral consequences, immoral consequences built into it, wired into it. It's not a solution. It's not a solution at all. We can see how a certain solution that's proposed comes with consequences, and those consequences, we don't have the freedom to say that it's okay to do that because it violates God's commands. That's the whole nature of the Christian life. We're called to obedience. So when a Christian comes up with a solution, the challenge is not just to come up with some temporal solution, but to come up with a solution that in no way offends God's commandments, that in no way disobeys God. That's the challenge. That's the real challenge. That's why so many kids, when they become young adults, they abandon religion because they see that, man, this religion gets in the way of I can think of so many solutions. I can solve this problem. I can solve this problem and this problem. It's easy to solve problems if I could just drop this religion. If I could just free myself from this moral code that I'm required to obey, if I could just get rid of this moral code, man, solving all these problems is easy. And that's why God gets dropped. God doesn't get dropped because people don't like thinking of that beyond which nothing greater can be imagined. That's not what offends people about God. People continue to talk about God in the sense of his existence. But what causes people to reject God is the fact that God is a God of commandments. He's just and holy, And that they're willing to abandon the creator of the universe to be free from his moral requirements. That's the whole point of the life of the laity. The whole point of the Christian life is that solutions need to be in no way offensive to God's commandments. That's the challenge. And you can see that that work, even though it's secular, it's very religious. Because if a solution can be developed that's within the sphere of God's commandments, that person not only solves a problem in the temporal world, but he allows others to work in serving that solution and doesn't require any of them to compromise their spiritual life. What a great, invaluable benefit that is to society. And that man who does that is worthy of honor, and he gets paid for it. And this is why I say this work of the laity offers men great benefits, great rewards. Now, the reason I talk about all this with business is because there's a difference between business revenue, which is in the business owner's control, and personal income, which really belongs to the wife and children. They have a claim on that personal income. So for a man to say, oh, this is my personal income that I take as this is my personal income. Well, the model of the husband is Christ, who, though he was rich, he had a good personal income. He had a nice paycheck. Yet he made himself poor, that through his poverty others might be made rich. So you can see that to grab hold of that paycheck, to take that take-home pay and say, this is mine. Well, how is that imitating Christ in his love for the church? How is that being the head of the household? And this is common among men. I see this all the time where men will look to be pampered and treated with some kind of favoritism from their wives. Daddy has this and that ice cream in the fridge. That's daddy's, and daddy's going to eat this, and daddy can use the steak sauce, but kids, you're not allowed to use steak sauce. Daddy can do this. Daddy can do this. Daddy does this. Daddy gets this. Daddy has extra meals. Daddy's allowed to eat outside of meal times. Daddy's allowed to do this. And you look at that daddy, and you look at Christ, and you ask, is that daddy like Christ? Where does Christ do those things? Where does Christ do those things? That's not Christ-like fatherhood. And yet it's common. It's common. But I think, again, that's part of the problem. Now, what's interesting providentially is that if a man devotes his life to his work, the expenses associated with his work are exempt from taxation. A man is allowed to spend money on the things that are considered necessary for his life's work. And those expenses are exempt from taxation. They're not considered his personal income. So notice how there's this division between the personal income of a man and his cost of living. Now, for example, I'm sitting in an office today, a beautiful office in the middle of my town, comfortable, nice place to work. There's air conditioning, very comfortable environment. We've got a nice kitchen. These are all business expenses. These are expenses that relate to my life's work, to me doing my life's work. And the government tells me that all of these expenses that relate to my life as a working man, none of them are accountable to income tax. They're just written as business expenses. They're deducted from my revenue that comes through business. So all of my necessary expenses, and really what's allowed by our government even goes beyond what's strictly necessary. My expenses, if I'm a man who is primarily focused on working, everything that I need is allowed in my business expenses. And so you can see that money that comes to me through my business revenue, costs of things that I need in order to do my life's work, those things are not part of my personal income. Those things are part of my business life, and it's exempt from taxation because it's not really considered my personal income. It's considered part of my necessary work. And in America, I don't know what tax codes are like in other countries, but in America, a man who works enjoys tax exemption for his work-related expenses. Think how beautiful that is. And so a man does have his own life and has his own money. As head of the household, he has his own income, that is his business revenue. He is able to obtain things that he needs because they're all considered business expenses. And outside of those expenses, if a man has all kinds of ambitions for all kinds of personal expenses, he wants 2 cars and he wants a jet ski and he wants to take vacation and he wants to do this and he wants to go watch the football game and buy tickets over there and he wants to do this and that and this and that. He wants to eat 4 times a day and he wants this and he wants to. All of that stuff comes out of his personal income. And all of that personal income was taxed. And that personal income was really the money for his wife and children. After all, if he needed things for work, his office furniture, his office utilities, his computer, if he needed things for his work, those things would all be covered by his business expenses. Why would that? None of that would need to come out of the money that's been taken for his family. So what happens is men seeking to take to themselves much more than is necessary for their life's work, take it from their wives and children. And when we go back again to the model of Christ, that Christ, though he was rich, and we can see the rich man is like this business managing, money-making head of the household. He's rich. Though he was rich, yet for our sake, that is for his family's sake, he became voluntarily poor, so that others, namely his wife and children, through his voluntary poverty, might be made rich. We can see what family life looks like. Now, it doesn't mean that the man walks around like a penniless slob, or that he starves to death, or that he doesn't have things that he needs for responsible business in a competitive market. But no, that's all fine. That's not the problem. The problem is that when men have this idea that their work life and their personal life are 2 separate things, they live that personal life with the money that was available for their wives and children. So that's what men need to think about. Now, there are many benefits, as I said. Men have the right to work. Men have the responsibility to work. This idea that the man is responsible to change diapers and hang around the house and all this that's just crazy modern nonsense. The man is responsible to work. He is not responsible to be at home. Again, this was taught by Xenophon in the ancient world. Look at man's body. He is not in need of dwelling in this safe home environment. He's made to be out in the world. He's made to be out in the market. He's made to be out working with other men in stressful, competitive circumstances. That's what he's made for. And so when we see these soft-bodied, pot-bellied, effeminate, soft-handed men sitting around the house, we see a man whose body is like the body of a woman. So there's obvious, I don't think we need to talk about the obvious problems with effeminate culture, but a man is free to work. He has to be free to work. He's responsible to provide for the family. He's not responsible to be a cook or a nanny or a babysitter. He's responsible to work and provide for the family. And if he does that, he should be able to provide for some of those needs. If his wife does have need for help, household help, he should be able to provide that help. It's not expensive. It's not expensive. For example, I could just be practical here. My mother had a stroke last January. She's no longer able to clean her house. Now, everyone could look at me and say, hey, you should help your mom. Your mom can't clean her house. You should, take off work and go clean your mother's house? No, that's not what any man should do. I can simply make a phone call to a cleaning service and send 2 or 3 ladies to my mother's house once every other week to clean the whole house for her. And that's fine. And because I stay focused on my work, I stay focused on what I do, my work prospers and continues to develop. And there's no problem providing for that need. I don't need to provide for that need by putting rubber gloves on and going and washing dishes for my mother. There are other alternatives. There are other ways to solve these problems that are more reasonable. And if men are working and if men are pursuing the work that they should be doing, it should generally be profitable. Otherwise, it's not really work. I mean, I could say that my mission in life is to remove all dirt from streets. So I'm just going to spend my days out wandering the streets with a dustpan and a garbage bag and say, look, I'm working my butt off doing this work. No, that's not responsible work. Again, there's other ways that work needs to get done. And a man who has a family needs to work in a gainful way that makes a profit because he has to provide for his wife and children. But I think men are free to stay focused on their life's work. I think it's advisable to have an office or a place of business where you can be away from your wife and children to handle all of the stress of your work, to put in your long hours where you need quiet so you can concentrate, or you need a place where you can meet people. And so I think it's necessary to have a place of business, even though that's another expense. The benefits of that place of business should make up for the cost of an office. If you work from home, still, in your home, you should have an office set apart where you stay and work, so that you're not sitting at the dining room table screaming at everybody to shut up so you can take a call. That's just not reasonable. That makes the family's life miserable. After all, the home is for the wife and children. The home is not for the man. The home is for the wife and children. And so that you can just see, I mean, we're over an hour now, so I want to stop this, but you can see that there are practical things that need to be considered. But we addressed some of the principal issues. I wasn't expecting that part of the talk to be this long, but I think it's important to discuss, and there's more to talk about, because this proper role of the head of a household brings with it benefits and privileges and real controls by which a man is able to govern his household. And so that a man is not going to spend time arguing with his children, fighting with his wife. It's not a democracy where there's going to be a vote held for every action that's taken. The man doesn't have to have everyone on his side for every decision that gets made. There's a natural order in the household. There's natural means by which problems are solved, questions are answered, decisions are made, and so on. And it's peaceful. It's peaceful because, and here's the key to all of that, the key to all of that. The wife and children will largely do what they do, and all the fighting in the world will rarely change that. But the man has the power, just as Christ did, to fix the problems, to prevent the problems, to overcome the problems, and so on. Think about it. Christ looked down at a world full of disobedient people, and there was this great problem, all of these problems. And Christ said, I can go fix all of these problems. I can go pay for all of these problems to be solved. And he went down into the world and took care of everything, paid for all of the problems, solved the whole problem. That's how Christ deals with his responsibilities. He doesn't yell at everybody else to do their share, because That's not in our control. He doesn't complain about society, doesn't complain about the culture, doesn't complain about external influences. He looks at the problem and sees himself as the solution, and he solves the problem. And if men understand that they have the power to do that, they'll enjoy a quiet and peaceful life where they can just solve problems, even if those problems are not, quote unquote, their fault, as if that matters. Doesn't matter. They're responsible. The problems that arise, there's always a means of solving them. And a man who has his life rightly ordered and has himself in a position that's responsible, where he's a true head of a household, he'll have the means available to fix the problems that arise and to allow his family to live happily and peacefully while he fulfills his mission in the world. His wife and children enjoy life in the care of a generous husband and father, and we have an image in that family of Christ and his church. So I'm going to cut off there. This is getting too long, but I hope that's helpful. I hope that gets some thoughts going. I'm sure it's provocative to some. Some men will hate it because they really like having bacon sandwiches at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they don't like the idea of being away from the kitchen long. I understand that. They don't like being away from the living room couch or in front of the TV or at their computer. Free to surf the internet, I understand that. But if we want to actually address the real problems, see what the cause is, my argument is the cause of the problems is in the man. It's not in the wife. It's not in the children. The problem in family culture is with the man, and that burden of taking responsibility for the good of a household, which is a Christ-like burden. That's not for everybody. In fact, I would argue that it's not for most. And it's why I would say that St. Peter responded when Christ taught about marriage. St. Peter responded and said, if this is true, then it is good for men not to marry. And there are many men, many Catholic men, who should not have married. And now they're stuck in a relationship that they're really not interested in. Not that they're not capable of. They are capable, but they're not interested in the work of a husband and father. And if you're a woman who's listened to this and you're offended and angry and upset, remember, you weren't supposed to listen to this. And the fact that you did is another part of the problem, but it's not a problem that a man can't overcome. So anyway, I hope that this is helpful. If there's anything in this you'd like to talk about and dig deeper into, I'd be happy to do so. If you'd like to suggest some subtopics that I could take up in future talks, I'd be happy to do that. But I think this is a good starting point and hope that helps. God bless.